All right, well, I think we're recording now, so we will begin. It is 2:15 on January 10th, 2025. This is the Legislative Study Commission for the Environmental and Health Impacts of Per and Polyfluorinated Chemicals. I'm Chris Bandasian chairing the meeting, and we do not have a quorum at this point, given our new membership from Hudson. And I don't think with Representative Mooney joining, we will have a quorum. So we will just proceed as an unofficial meeting. Welcome, Representative Mooney. So we'll defer approval of last month's minutes. I guess, never mind. Thought we almost made it, but we didn't. We're still one short. So we'll pass over approval of minutes and just address vacancies on the commission if we can. Welcome, Representative Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be back.
And does anybody have any insight on the Senate vacancy left by Senator Ricciardi or any other appointments from Hudson or elsewhere?
You know, Chris, my understanding, and Nancy would probably be able to answer this better than me, but my understanding is that anyone who's been appointed to the commission stays until they leave. So I'm wondering, it didn't seem like there was any expiration on the appointments of the previous senators, or for me, for instance, I don't think I was reappointed. I think I just, because I was initially appointed and that stayed. I don't know if there's another interpretation of the statute.
Yeah, I don't. I know that Senator Ricciardi's assistant notified me that she'd been assigned to other committees and was not back on this commission.
Oh, okay. So that would leave a Senate vacancy. But I don't think any of the existing representatives or Senator Carson, I mean, obviously, I'm sure she's pretty busy, but I don't think those expire just when their term expires. I think they expire if they're not in that role that they were initially appointed to, or they resign the position.
Okay. All right. Ron, do you have any update on your seat and being the town council representative or legislative representative?
I don't have any update at this moment. Rosemary and I were just talking about it in the other room. I have a person that's willing to take the citizen role, and as soon as he agrees and we agree on him, I can get him appointed to the town council.
Okay.
And then we also have someone from Hudson who is, he hasn't confirmed yet. He wants to talk to me about it, but I spoke to him on Wednesday and he's very interested. His name is Dylan Dumont. He's a new state rep from Hudson. And he would fulfill the role of, well, he's on the town council for Salem too. Maureen, I'm trying to think, I think we were looking at him for that town position.
For Hudson, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's vacant.
Okay. All right. I think we need to try to get those vacancies filled because it's going to be hard to reach a quorum now that we have to get to 12 going forward. And next on the agenda, I had election of chair and clerk. I guess we should push that off till we have a quorum. And just not making a campaign speech here, but I did separate out clerk. I enjoy everything about what I do except asking other people to take minutes. So if somebody was interested in doing that, I would be interested in doing what I'm doing for another year. But everybody's busy and has important things to do. I just don't like nor do I like doing minutes every month. So with that, Mike, can you give us an update from DES?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. And the update for DES, we'll start with the Air Resources Division, as we usually do. Obviously, not much going on there. The company submitted a request to the division to terminate their air permit. No action's been taken on that request to date. They'll just be required to satisfy some remaining reporting requirements and submit emissions fees prior to the termination. So that's a largely an administrative task at this point. And then, as I had mentioned earlier, they requested a waiver back in October to the requirements to do a stack test because they had already disassembled the unit and no longer had any emissions. And so that was back in late October that request was approved so that they didn't have to conduct a stack test. And we'll have a little more information about what's going on with the RTO in a bit. So I think everyone now at this point knows that back in October, the company announced plans to demolish the building at the facility, and they immediately began work associated with demolition, including disconnection of all utilities and some asbestos abatement work, both on the interior and exterior surfaces of the building that needed to occur. They initially received a local demolition permit from the town for non-asbestos impacted areas of the facility, and they began demolition of the one-story portion of the building where finished product fabrication was previously performed. They completed asbestos abatement and PCB remediation in other parts of the building and applied for a demolition permit with the town in December for the remaining portions of the building. It's my understanding that they've now received permits for 3 separate phases of demolition. So for completing the demolition of the buildings at the site from the town permitting authority. And then the building will reportedly be dismantled in sections by removing the roof and the exterior walls following some scarification of the concrete floor, and then removing interior steel structures. And they've indicated that the structural steel will be removed and will go off as scrap steel for recycling, and demolition debris from portions of the building that are significantly impacted by PFAS contamination will be disposed of at an out-of-state hazardous waste landfill. The company's planning to remove the entire above-ground structure, leaving only the concrete floor and foundation. As I mentioned earlier, they're scarifying the concrete floor surface to remove superficial contamination before removal of the structure. And that work is going on. There's some areas of the building where there was some PCB contamination, both in paint and in the concrete, and that remedial work is being done. I think they did do some scarification of that material, and the confirmatory sampling they did after removal of the top surface still left some contamination that was above standards. So they're going back to a few areas of the floor to do further scarification and decontamination. And we've requested them to provide us with periodic status updates, and actually we just got one yesterday that essentially a brief memorandum from their contractor Ramball that's handling the demolition and decommissioning, facility decommissioning work. That outlined a bunch of things that I've just described for what they've done in December, and then gave a few bullets for what they, and we'll put a link to this in the minutes, but basically a few bullets for what they anticipate doing this month. And that includes transportation and offsite disposal of regulated materials removed from the building, things like fluorescent bulbs and ballasts, mercury switches, aerosol cans, and other regulated wastes. And they have started the interior and exterior demolition of the main building structure, or they expect to start that, excuse me, in January, which they're calling, that's phase 3 of their demolition permit. And they'll continue and then complete the concrete floor scarification process in the main portion of the building. And then they also will continue scrap and construction debris load out to the appropriate facilities. And so basically it's what I've described. So that's what's anticipated for January. They're still saying, that all these processes could take a good portion of 2025, but they seem to be making pretty good progress in the early going here. We'll continue to talk with them and make visits to the site to make sure that we're comfortable with everything that's happening. With regard to, so for the division's update on alternate water and such, with regard to point of entry treatment systems for impacted water supplies, As I think most folks know by now, the contractors doing that are Second Wind Water Systems and Culligan Water. And they have been, we essentially outlined and approved a plan for that going back to 2022. POET installations began in December of 22. And at this point, as of January 8th, so just a couple days ago, 686 POET systems have been installed. Moving on to the construction of waterline work. Saint-Gobain is proceeding with construction work for waterline installations within the towns of Litchfield, Bedford, and Merrimack. These are areas that have existing water lines where homes require connections to the water mains in the street, and areas where new water mains need to be installed. And construction associated with the Hillcrest Road water main extension area of Litchfield has now been substantially completed. Some final paving and restoration work will be performed this spring. And a total of 55 residences have been disconnected from their water supply well and are now receiving water provided by the water utility as part of that project. The utility has indicated that 32 properties declined connection to the water line. 14 of those properties have opted to have a line extended from the curb stop to the house, but not to connect the house system. 10 residences didn't respond to notices from either the water utility or from DES, and 8 residences provided a response indicating that they declined connection to municipal water. The utility installed a curb stop in the street at those 18 locations, and Saint-Gobain will be notifying the 87 owners in the area that bottled water deliveries will be discontinued now that connections and offers have been made. Contractors have begun service connections to existing water mains in the towns of Bedford and Londonderry. Service application requests have been sent to 33 eligible properties, and completed applications have been received for 30 locations. The water utility reported that significant bedrock ledge was encountered on Kimball Road, and that slowed construction slightly. Exterior service lines have been installed at 26 locations, and water meters have been installed at 19 properties. The remaining exterior service lines will be installed this spring when roadways are reopened for construction, and interior service connection work is anticipated to continue into the winter of 2020, during this winter period. Saint-Gobain's consultant finalized design packages for extensions and connections to existing water mains for the Merrimack area in the Wildcat Brenda Lane service connections area, and began construction in late summer of 2024. The water main extension on Brenda, John, and Edward Lanes has been installed, testing is completed, and service applications have been received from all 26 eligible properties. Exterior service line connections are complete, and interior water meter installation work has been completed at 14 properties. The remaining water meters and restoration tasks will occur through the spring of this year. Connections to existing water mains in Merrimack and Bedford began in July. The contractors installed the service line from the stop to end at 31 locations, and water meters have been installed at 9 locations in Bedford, excuse me, and 22 locations in Merrimack. A total of 6 properties haven't responded to the application request for those areas. Companies working with a utility in the town of Londonderry to evaluate the feasibility of waterline extensions in that town. The conceptual design was completed by the utility on behalf of the company in spring of 23. DS has met with Saint-Gobain, the town of Londonderry, and the utility multiple times to discuss the expanded water service in that area. Londonderry has been approved by the Drinking Water and Groundwater Trust Fund Advisory Commission for an $8 million grant to supplement the town's and Saint-Gobain's contributions to the larger project, and negotiations between the town and the company continue. On April 6th of 23, DES received a letter from the company proposing to delay submittal of an application for a groundwater management permit until completion of a second set of PFAS samples from all drinking water wells at the site. DES concurred that a confirmation sample from all wells would assist in delineating the boundary of the groundwater management zone and developing the long-term monitoring plan that's required under the permit. So we issued an approval letter in May of 23 and requested that the application for the permit be submitted to us by May of this past year. The company and DES met to discuss the application back in May. And based on the outcome of that meeting, it was determined that the company would not be submitting a groundwater permit application in June as had been anticipated. Instead, the company proposed to conduct long-term monitoring of drinking water wells under a work plan. And a work plan outline was received in June, and DES provided approval with comment in July. In September, the company submitted a groundwater management zone work plan, and DES met with the company in October to discuss the work plan and the contested areas for sampling within the CD outer boundary. DES provided preliminary comments to the company on the proposed monitoring schedule, and they submitted a revised work plan just this past month in December. So we're reviewing that revised work plan, and we'll be providing a response sometime probably before the end of this month, so that they can begin the work on that water supply sampling program. They've indicated that they're prepared to start that sampling program immediately upon approval. And we anticipate that that will inform, give us some additional information that will be very helpful in actually working out what a groundwater management permit will actually look like in the end. So we expect there'll be a year or two of this work, and then a groundwater management permit application would come on the heels of that. DES has periodically been receiving updated proposals from the company to remedy additional water supply wells within the consent decree area. And that has had a number of term sheets and attachments, and we're up through attachment 22, which was received and reviewed by DES back in November. That attachment includes an updated list of remedies for all properties that have been worked on since the April 22 original proposal. So we anticipate that the next proposal will be submitted sometime this month. And then with regard to water supply sampling, the company presented a work plan for residential well sampling, and has submitted 18 different addenda and updates to that plan. That addendum was approved in January of last year, so about a year ago. Their consultant Golder has been collecting a second set of samples from all the wells previously sampled only once that exhibited results below 10 parts per trillion. And as of January 2nd of this year, second samples have been collected from approximately 1,206 properties, which represents about 95% of the targeted properties for resampling. Laboratory analytical results for those second samples have indicated that between 5 and 10% of those resampled properties have exhibited exceedances of a drinking water standard, and those properties have been issued bottled water eligibility eligibility letters from the company. Previously unsampled wells within the consent decree, as we've discussed a number of times in these meetings, DES has consistently expressed the need for additional sampling addenda to address completing sampling of water supply, all the water supply wells within the consent decree area. And we've had some back and forth on this since 2023. The outcome of those meetings and those discussions is that Saint-Gobain has not agreed to deviate from their plan, which is their current methodology, where essentially they, when they do sample, if they identify exceedances, they would expand out an additional 500 feet and do sampling. And that's not been acceptable to us. They have done some sampling following that methodology, and the department has been conducting sampling for the remaining homes within the outer boundary where they've not offered to sample. And so the sampling effort that the department did was initiated in March of 24, and as of just this past week, approximately 86 residences have been sampled, and results have been received for all properties. Of the results received, approximately 10% of those properties have exhibited an exceedance of the current ambient groundwater quality standard, and 70% exceed the newly promulgated EPA MCL. So approximately 66 property owners have not responded to the sample invitation, and one has declined sampling. And we've notified those folks 3 times by mail. We don't have current plans to send out any additional mailers right now, but we'll continue sampling any properties that reach out to us with requests for sampling. To give you some statistics about sampling, as of the 2nd of this month, and this is updated through the latest addendum for sampling, 3,868 properties identified for sampling have been identified for sampling. That's one more than our November report. 3,855 access agreements were sent with a return rate of about 73%, which has been holding pretty steady. 2,576 samples were collected from water supply wells. That's 2 more than our last report. And 1,200 second samples have been collected from water supply wells. And that's 2 more than the November report. That's 1,206. And that includes 1,033 of which were collected since June of 2023. And then a total of 1,177 properties have been offered bottled water, and that's 11 more than the November report. Moving on to the site investigation, and we've talked about this at some length in these meetings. I think folks know that a remedial action plan was initially submitted to the department back in May of 2023. We met with the company and their consultant in June of that year to discuss the RAP and our dissatisfaction with it, and they submitted a RAP addendum following those discussions. We met again with the company and their representatives of December 2023. Again, they had not met the mark, and we provided comment on the RAP and the RAP addendum in a letter dated October 10th of 24. The RAP and the RAP addendum are determined to not meet the requirements still of the rules, and that we outline those deficiencies in some detail in our October 10th, 2024 letter. We met with the company in November of this past year, and as a result of those discussions, they've indicated that they will submit a RAP addendum, a further RAP addendum that further evaluates remedial alternatives that may reduce contamination at the site. So I'm not sure how soon that's going to come in, but we're looking for that, and hopefully we're going to make some progress. I'm short of having to do this through enforcement, but essentially we're really looking for the company to provide some meaningful proposals for significantly reducing mass of contaminant at the site, so that will have an expectation of having long-term benefits, even though they may not be able to restore groundwater at the site to drinking water standards in any reasonable time. We have made it very clear to them that we expect them to, undertake remedial activities that will have a significant and meaningful impact in reducing the mass of contamination that is there. And you will see in the notes or in the meeting minutes, there will be the usual update with hot links to a variety of documents, and it's also followed by some bar graphics and pie charts of the sort of progress of implementing remedial measures at the site for POET installations and waterline installations. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions for Mike? Lorraine, go ahead.
Thank you for that update on the RAP. I'll hold off on any comments on that until next time. But I have 2 questions about your earlier announcements. One is, when you talk about the work plan that they submitted over sampling, the last I read on that, there were still and you said you accepted some of that. So I'm curious about what was accepted, because last I heard, hopefully there's something more than this. They were talking about homes between 9 and 11 parts per trillion they would resample in 3 years. And my point, that I've been hammering is we're well above the law of the land, and they should not be, that doesn't make any sense to me, as we are phasing in, national standards. So what are they proposing specifically at this point in their revised work plan that is either approved or in approval? And I don't think that's adequate, that 9 to 11 parts sampling in 3 years, because those homes are not being served clean water, and they're not eligible for bottled water because they're underneath their agreement of 12 parts. And my concern is that's a lot of homes thinking they may be safe, and they're not.
Yeah, well, and keep in mind, this is not the groundwater management permit. This is not the long-term monitoring plan that would be outlined under a groundwater management permit. This is a proposal to do additional work to provide information that will help inform what that long-term monitoring plan would look like. I confess I'm not as specifically familiar with that particular term. I'm not sure if that was actually part of an initial groundwater management permit or the actual work plan, but that plan is still being reviewed, and we expect to comment on that in the next few weeks. Very likely we'd have a letter going out on that.
So the 9 to 11 parks people, please keep them in mind, because there's, you know, the numbers as you tell us the percentages each month in each category, you know, the under 4, the over 4, the 4 to 10. But that section there, we have a huge bump of people. So thanks for that. The other thing is when you're talking about what they're doing for demolition, could you speak a little more? What do you know about people in town have been talking about these concrete pads that are being left, and we had a great explanation last month of the process of, you know, taking off the 1/2 inch, making a slurry, sending it off on a poly sheet to Canada. That was very interesting. So I'm unclear. If you look at a site, and if I put aside, you know, what you know that we need is better remediation than they're proposing, and we just look at what you're leaving behind, you know, I'm unclear as to, you have this site and it's going to be left with all these concrete pads. Is there a resistance to, if you break them up and cut them up, now you're into remediation and what's underneath those pads? Or what, I mean, what is the standard? Because this is, you know, I can drive by there and see some of these pads there, and I'm real curious as to what people think the future is going to look like. I don't think you can build upon someone else's, you know, altered concrete pad. That doesn't seem like building code to me. So what, you know, it's just a lot of dialogue around town about this topic and a lot of speculation that, you know, isn't really valid. So what are your thoughts on that? Is this normal? Is this par for the course?
It is not unheard of, but there's some, it's not uncommon for building demolition to leave a foundation or portions of a foundation in place. I think this foundation is very unique in the sense that it was originally constructed, as I understand it, to build the GE facility that actually, whose, I guess, sole purpose was to manufacture a couple of huge turbines for the Seabrook nuclear power plant. And there was a rail line that went through the middle of the building so that they could bring in materials, manufacture, and then haul it out. And so that foundation is very beefy. It is a very thick, dense concrete foundation built to a much higher spec than virtually any other, you know, typical building foundation. In other words, just to support the weight of the building, that foundation is significantly overbuilt because of what it was purposely constructed for. So not necessarily surprising that they wouldn't be looking to demolish that. I won't speak to their reasons for wanting to do it or not do it, but as far as, you know, any contamination associated with the concrete, typically what we see is if hazardous materials are handled over a concrete floor or a concrete slab, there can be some, you know, because concrete is porous, there can be some, particularly in the very, you know, first layers of the concrete, some contamination that can get in there. And apparently that's what they have observed. There's a few areas where PCBs got into the concrete and they scarified that area and removed it. And if I'm reading correctly, the summary they gave us, in at least one area, the levels of PCB contamination in the remaining concrete were still above a standard. So they're going back to do more scarification of that. And my understanding of the scarification process is that it can remove anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to a 1/2 inch of the concrete. And so presumably they'll be doing that in areas where they need to get to, you know, to cleaner concrete. And that's my understanding of what they're doing. But make no mistake, you know, the demolition of the building and whether the foundation leaves or doesn't leave, that's not really what the remediation plan for the site needs to be about. It needs to be about soil and groundwater at the facility that have significant levels of PFAS contamination in them. And we're looking for, you know, a robust remedial action or actions to be proposed that will significantly reduce that contamination.
Thank you. It's good to hear that stronger language, and maybe what we need to do is maybe everyone on this commission can ask a representative from our newly sworn in governor or the governor herself to join to get a more robust picture of what the challenge is here for DES to make these demands of Saint-Gobain, which have for Nick's, which is almost 2 years have been refused. But thanks.
Rosemary? You're muted.
I'm sorry, I think Wendy had her hand up first.
Oh, okay,
Chris,
sorry.
yeah.
Wendy, go
Oh,
ahead.
oh, that's okay. Okay, so I've got 3 questions. One has to do with the concrete flooring. If they keep the concrete flooring in place, although take off the top couple of inches or whatever they're talking about, can they claim that they've capped that area, that they've capped the land?
No, because the contamination, it's not a very big site, but soil and groundwater contamination extend over the whole footprint of the site, not just under the concrete foundation.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure they didn't have an out there. My second question was, could they have sold the building as is? Or because of the contamination?
I don't believe there's, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I don't believe there was any specific law that would say they couldn't have sold the building. I mean, it is not uncommon for commercial and industrial manufacturing properties to transact, and the conditions associated with those transactions are of all varieties. Some in which the buyer says you got to make it clean before I'll take possession. Other ones where the seller says we're selling it to you, you're taking responsibility for everything, and there's actually a contractual agreement that the new buyer will be responsible for any existing environmental conditions and everything in between. So I don't know that there is any, I'm not aware of any law that would have said they could not have sold the property.
Okay, and we know that their headquarters are in France. Could they abandon this property?
I guess that's probably a legal question. I mean, they at some level, I mean, they're as long as they own the property, or even after they own the property, we're aware, and we know the record reflects that they had a release there that caused significant contamination. And under state law and administrative rule, they have a responsibility to investigate and remediate that. Does not matter where they're headquartered, whether they currently physically occupy the site or anything else, they still have that responsibility.
Okay. And actually, I had one more question. This is regarding hooking the houses up to public water. Has there ever been any discussion of Saint-Gobain paying for the monthly cost of public water, which is a new cost that is incurred upon these households because of Saint-Gobain?
Yeah, that was something that, as you can imagine, a lot of folks brought up at the time, particularly, the first major effort for extending public water. And this project goes all the way back to like 2017 and 18 when we were working in Litchfield. And in fact, that first phase connected somewhere on the order of 450 properties in an area where there wasn't even a water system at the time. So they extended water lines and created a new water system there. And there was discussion about that at the time. DES's approach to, it has a rule requirement and that's since been placed in statute that if you impact someone, if as a result of a release that you cause, you impact someone's drinking water well above standards, you have a responsibility to provide them with alternate water. And it's always been the case that you either do that one of two ways, either through providing connection to a public water system or through provision of point of entry treatment system or other treatment system to treat the water from the existing well. And we have not required that the party that provides that also pay long-term for drinking for the water bills. I can understand why people might want that, and I'm not sure that they couldn't pursue that remedy on their own, but it's not something that DES has ever required as part of its as part of our enforcement of the remedial action requirements under our rules.
So could it be that it's never required because we've never come across this kind of a situation? I mean, is it time to revisit that?
I think that's a policy question. You know, certainly the legislature could take that up as a policy question. We've been asked the question before. One of the concerns we've had is that about that is that, and that's not with respect to this. I'm talking about in the abstract, because we deal with this. You know, we deal with sites that have impacted people's wells all over the state in various different. You know, sometimes it's one well, other times it's a dozen wells. But one of the concerns we have is that usually that remedy of providing alternate water is pretty expensive. And it's not always easy for us to get cooperation from parties to do that. Sometimes parties don't actually have the resources to do it. But when they do it, it's a good remedy. We feel like provision of alternate water through connection to a public water system is the best remedy. And what we would not want is people who maybe would be, you know, responsible parties who might be prepared to do that in lieu of providing point of entry treatment systems, but might be scared away from the never-ending long-term liability associated with paying water bills forever. So but that's a policy question, right? And that's not, I mean, that's something that the legislature could certainly take up.
I'm all set. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Rosemary, go ahead.
Thanks, Chris. Can everybody hear me okay? Because when I
Yes.
first joined, it was muffled. Okay. And Mike, this may sound really naive and ignorant, but what the problem with that site is when the PFAS in the soil leaches into the groundwater or into surface water, correct? So would a remedy to be considered would just be to cap it to prevent any water from getting into the soil and leaching. What about just capping the site and diverting any water precipitation that would fall on it to avoid the soil becoming leached? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And in fact, at a lot of sites, that is in some ways the way that we try to address contamination. Typically, capping at our sites is about eliminating or contact risk with soils, because generally we don't, unless it's not feasible, we don't usually want someone to just cap soils that pose a risk to groundwater if they can be more permanently remediated. The reason why that approach might not be a good approach for this site is that much of the contamination in the soils and is already in the soil, in the saturated soils and in the groundwater. So even if you capped it and you had some incremental improvement by eliminating or diverting precipitation that would go down through the unsaturated soils, you already have such a massive contamination below the water table. And of course, the water table migrates horizontally, that you are still the site soils and groundwater would still it would still serve as a continuing source of additional contamination to offsite groundwater and surface water. So while there may be, you know, it's possible, I won't prejudge it, that there may be some limited areas of the site where that kind of capping approach could be effective. It would unlikely to be significantly effective for most of the site.
Because my concern is that unless you prevent the leaching and you take the PFAS out, or you filter it and you take it out, you're just spreading the contamination, because we don't have a way that can efficiently remove PFAS from soil and then return it, correct?
Well,
Essentially, we're just yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there are a couple of ways to approach it. One is if you have significant massive contamination in a particular area of soil, you could simply excavate that soil and dispose of it off-site. So you remove it from the site. The other common way to deal with this is if you have high concentrations of groundwater contamination in the site, you could put in extraction wells at the site, pump those wells, pump that highly contaminated groundwater out of the ground. We have very effective means of treating groundwater and water that's contaminated with PFAS. Remove that PFAS and re-inject the treated water back in the ground. So you're actually in fact removing mass of contamination from the site, from the groundwater, and destroying it or you know, disposing of it off-site. So, you know, those are kind of some of the things that we'll be looking for. You know, we don't know. There may be in the works in situ treatment technologies that might be effective at dealing with PFAS in the future. You know, we're in this for the long haul. We know that we're not going to restore this site to drinking water quality anytime soon. But we need to be taking steps and looking for a long-term remedial plan that has the hopes of reducing that mass of contamination over time. And then, you know, eventually getting to a point where the site doesn't pose such a significant risk to offsite contamination that it does now.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, you know, when you talk about the possibility of excavating and then taking it someplace else, it's still going to contaminate wherever it's going. Okay, maybe it's going to a PFAS landfill where PFAS is already there, but
It could be,
until
or it
we-
could go to a facility where the soil would be treated to destroy the PFAS. There are a
okay,
lot of technologies being worked on now, so.
okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mike.
Other questions for Mike? Go ahead, Laureen.
Just want to follow up as you were talking about, you know, public water and your request of, you know, making this right. It just brought me back to topics that we've talked about in the past over DES. Oh, not even last year, maybe the year before, it started that process where you were trying to engage them about, you know, the wells and the public water. Because the irony is that they're connecting homes to our public water source, and our public water source has been cleaned up at our expense. The responsible party is using our work, which is immense, right? You know, we've done a really good job here as a community to kind of bail them out. So did anything come of letters that you had sent to them about looking at, you know, public wells being treated as equally as private wells, you know, from a state ask, as opposed to letting them carve out MVD and say, oh, we have a separate agreement? Any progress there, or, you know,
Well,
it's just not
yeah,
right?
I mean, we talked about that at some length, and at the end of the day, the agreement that MVD made with the company, you know, really disadvantaged them in that regard, and there wasn't much that the state could do. I don't know that I really want to have a detailed discussion about it here, but
No. I just wondered if you, so basically at this point, it's up to the MVD and their legal action, is what you're saying. There's nothing more you can do. I get that. I accept it. I was wondering.
Other
Thank you.
questions for Mike? If not, I have a couple of quick ones. Mike, I was looking at Saint-Gobain's long-term plan with respect to newly drilled wells and notices. And what they've proposed is to send out to ask DES every 6 months, where is there a new well in the groundwater management zone, and to send out notices. But they're only proposing to do sampling if a property has previously tested positive or has been provided with alternate water. And I don't think that's right. I think they should test all wells in the new wells in the GMZ. You know, as we know, there's so much variability there, and you know, water can be sourced from different fissures at different levels. Wells go dry. You know, we've had a drought in 2016. We had almost as severe conditions this past year. So I really think they ought to be sampling all new wells in the GMZ. So just putting that out there. And the other is whether, in addition to looking at the hazardous waste site documents on One Stop and the GIS map, is there any other source of information for Hudson that we can be looking at to be better up to speed?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, are you asking, is there some other data
So,
source that
yes.
you don't know about?
Other than those two, other than those two. I mean, I guess we can look at the public utility that sourced water from those two wells in Litchfield and see what their water quality reports show.
I mean,
But
what
is there-
we've tried to do with our, you know, PFAS mapper and such is to provide all the data we have for drinking water and other, you know, samples that have been taken for PFAS. So that should be the most comprehensive data that we have. Obviously, if you're looking more in the aggregate, not just PFAS contamination, you do need to look at, our hazardous waste site data and things like that to make sure that if you're trying to evaluate a particular location for any potential contaminants, you want to look as comprehensively as you can at the various data sets. But if you're just talking about PFAS, my understanding is that PFAS mapper should be pretty comprehensive.
Okay, unless there's other questions for Mike on DES, we'll move on to DHHS and Leanne.
Good afternoon. I'll start off with an update on the Merrimack cancer investigation. So the teams continue to meet monthly with the steering committee, and quarterly meetings of the scientific advisory board and community advisory board are being scheduled for January and February. So an update on the 4 main components of the study. The first is the community engagement studios and online feedback form. The community engagement studios have been completed. The feedback form does remain live. The Dartmouth team regularly reviews comments and questions submitted from community members on the form. It's a good way to provide ideas or suggestions related to the feasibility study. That is generally anonymous, that feedback form. There's also a study email that folks can contact if they want a direct response back to their comments or questions. The next component is the cancer registry data analysis. So the cancer registry data analysis team is working towards finalizing the analysis with feedback from the steering committee and scientific advisory board. The team is planning to present the summary of the findings from that analysis at this commission meeting in February, so at the February 14th commission. The Dartmouth team will be here to talk about those results. The third part of the study is the UNH feasibility study. So the team worked with the UNH Survey Center to deploy a survey to a representative sample of adult residents in New Hampshire. It'll allow us to understand community concerns about and knowledge of environmental health issues and gauge interest in participating in a future population-based research study. A survey of 40 questions was distributed to 8,500 members of the Granite State panel back in November, with oversampling of the results from Merrimack and the surrounding towns. So at the last meeting of this commission, there was a question about whether or not the survey could be deployed to a wider audience, in Merrimack. And we talked about that with the study team. And given that the survey was used a scientific sampling scheme and it's intended to provide statistically significant information, we didn't feel like that was the appropriate way to get information about community concerns and suggestions. And so that online feedback form and also the study email are the best way for people to provide input and ask any questions and provide comments. The last piece of the study is the pilot study. The team's working on developing the study design, and it has to go through an institutional review board review and protocol. So they're still working on getting all of that approval together, and that will be the primary activity for the rest of the project. Lastly, we received feedback about an interest in having HHS analyze additional years of cancer registry data for other types of cancer. So we thank you for your feedback on the importance of doing this analysis. We have decided to move forward with the analysis. We did receive feedback at the last commission meeting that we'd like to wait and do that analysis until we have the VA data incorporated into the cancer registry data. So just a reminder that will take several months before those data are incorporated. And so we'll start this additional analysis once we have those data. So it'll be a few months out. But we will be looking at data from 1995 onward and updating the cancer incident report that was previously done and is posted on our website. And then we will keep the commission updated on the progress of that analysis as we start it, and we'd be happy to come and present the findings at a future meeting once that's completed. So just another, on a last note, this will be the last meeting that I'm attending as the HHS representative for the commission. I've accepted a position over at Department of Environmental Services, actually working with Mike in the Waste Division as the state site section supervisor in the Hazardous Waste Remediation Bureau. I worked there in that bureau for several years, back in 2015. So I'm excited to be moving back over there. It's been a pleasure to be on the commission with all of you. In the interim, Michelle Roberge, who is the bureau chief for the Bureau of Public Health Protection at HHS, is going to be stepping in and attending these meetings until my replacement's hired. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Leanne. We'll miss you at these meetings. But you're not going far, so that's reassuring. Questions for Leanne? Maureen, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that report and good luck with your new position. Just curious as to whether you can give us any idea as to the number of participants. I know that you mentioned several sections of the study and so forth, but is there any chance we could get a feel for the participation level? Thank you.
In terms of like the community engagement studios and feedback forums, is that what you're talking about? I don't have those numbers with me. That's something that we could get from Dartmouth, and maybe they could talk about at, when they're at the meeting next month. So are you thinking you want to know the number of people that participated in or submitted feedback in the community engagement studios? Is that
yes,
primarily? Okay.
Yes, that's a good starting point. I
Okay.
can imagine there's various participation levels that are different from each of the sections, but that's a good starting point.
Okay. Yeah, we can get those data together as well. So, okay. Thank you.
Maureen, I think you were next.
I had a thought in the last week, Leanne, and I wonder if you can point me in the right direction. Somebody at DHHS can do this since you like to get stuff in people's hands. All the homes that either were remediated or on bottled water in the work plan, or even those who applied for the New Hampshire grant program, if their wells tested over MCLs, what strikes me about them is we remediated, but we really didn't really give them necessarily the resources that we need. Like if you were in a, Superfund or surplus site, you're getting, so much more than we're getting here. So I thought, we worked very hard on some resource materials with DHHS, DES, and Dartmouth, and we have the New Hampshire specific PFAS fact sheet, and we also have the physician guidance. I think it's 3 or 4 page form. And I believe it's housed on the Dartmouth Geisel School of Medicine's website. I looked at the DHHS website to see if it was apparent, because under DES, we have the whole PFAS info page, and it's pretty easy to navigate. We've done a lot of work giving feedback, and you guys have done a good job there. DHHS, if you go there for the health piece, I know how to navigate at this point, and I really couldn't meet with much success finding that. So I want to work with people on how do we get this resource into people's hands. They're going to need that moving forward. Cleaning up your water is step one, but health monitoring is, we all know this is crucial. Maybe there's a way that if the state has the list of homes that have received grants or they have been remediated, either A, you can send that out. I don't know if you have emails or what contact information you have for those homes, but I think the ask here is, can we get those 2 sheets that we worked on, really good information, but it's sitting somewhere out in the web. It's not going where it needs to go. And maybe we can direct send it to everyone and work on making that more visible.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful feedback, and I know we are looking at the best way to distribute those resources. So that's not something that that has come up before. So it's certainly something that we could consider if that would be feasible.
Nancy.
Thank you, Chris. I love Laureen's idea. And I wanted to thank Leanne for following up on the VA concern that I know I've raised a number of times, because I certainly think it would be it makes such good sense to include data that we know exists and is important to the study. So thank you for that and good luck to you. Back to DES.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Leanne? I'll just note that there on February 13th this evening, Community Advisory Board meeting, and Community Advisory Board members are always interested in hearing from members of the community. And so with that, Maureen, is there anything at the legislature that you can report on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I have the 2025 tracking chart with only 2 bills on it. So just another announcement, if anybody has any bills to track for this commission, let me know and I'll gladly enter them on the chart. But the 2 bills that I placed there already have numbers and have already been assigned to committees. So things are moving right along. The first one is House Bill 199. That is an act eliminating the statute of limitation on civil actions relative to damage caused by PFAS. That's been referred now to House Judiciary. And then House Bill 167, formerly LSR 141, actually sponsored by Representative Thomas, who's now a part of the commission here. An act prohibiting the sale of ski, boat, and board waxes that contain intentional added PFAS substances. That now has been referred to House Commerce. And with that, I'll conclude the report. And I will add Representative Thomas to the chart so she can view it in a Google Doc. And that's my report. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I think that brings us to the end of our agenda this afternoon. And I'll just note it's 3:12 p.m. Our next meeting is February 14th, Friday at 2 p.m. And hope to see you all there. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.